As someone who's helped many companies successfully sell their business, what's the short version of what attracts buyers and why will they pay a premium price?
Yeah, it's when you're selling your staffing company, and there's a lot of levers that owners can push and pull in order to get the maximum valuation. But I'll summarize it down to a couple of things. The first thing that potential buyers are going to be looking for is fit within their own portfolio company or fit within their own strategic. And what we're talking about that is not just the vertical that you're in. Are you in light industrial? Are you in skilled trades? Are you in locums? So that's gonna be the first big rock. And they're also looking at size in terms of the growth of the company. What is your revenue and what is your EBITDA? Once that's done, Terry, they put a pin in that and say, here's a general valuation that this company could be worth. And then they look fundamentally at five things that will either handicap or accent that company in terms of its own attractiveness. The first is the management team that is not named the owner, right? It is the team that is below the owner or below the CEO and the quality of that team. The second is financials, and you've got an expert on this webinar in terms of Nick Florio, who can talk more about financials. But they want to make sure that the company is clean in terms of its financials, and that they are up to date and they are being accounted for correctly. The next thing is customer concentration and customer relationships, and that is, are they transferable? Are they good relationships? And are they long-standing and profitable relationships, and that there's no customer concentration? Next, they're also looking for, do you have a plan for the business a couple of years out? Typically 2 years out. Do you have a game plan for the company? Does the company have growth? And lastly, what are the systems that underlie the company? Are you on systems that are industry standards? What do your systems look like for I-9 verification, E-Verify, and other elements like that? So looking at industry, size, and then those five things is going to make a company much more attractive.
Sounds like it's going to keep me busy. Nick, following on Patrick's comments, how and when should a company prepare themselves for a potential sale?
So preparation should really begin about 2 to 3 years before you plan to sell. Selling your business is a daunting process, and most owners will really only do this once in a perfect world. So advanced preparation is critical. You can start by getting acquainted with industry experts. You definitely want to hire the best attorney and the best accountant that are knowledgeable both in staffing and M&A. Both of those skills are important. And then depending upon the size of your business, you certainly want to consider engaging an investment banker, because they're going to help you with the marketing and promotion and sorting of offers that you get. So get referrals from trusted sources. And once you get those referrals, take your time and vet them accordingly.
Nick, and maybe Patrick as well. Nick, you mentioned given a certain size, you might want to hire an investment banker. Could you maybe put a little bit of a quantitative around that?
Yeah, there's not really a floor or a ceiling. Investment bankers will, do transactions that are, north of 15 or $20 million in valuation. There are others that won't start until you get to a $50 million valuation. So, there's different size investment bankers out there as well. And certainly Patrick can discuss more about that too.
Yeah, Patrick, you want to jump in a little?
Yeah, absolutely. To go back to what Nick said a little bit earlier, selling your company is a pretty complex and pretty emotional experience, because a lot of times owners are going to have they have not only their net worths built into the company, but they also have certain emotional connections to it. They built it, they grew it. It's part of their person and their persona. And the process of going through and selling your company, it's usually very, very technical. There's a lot of legal issues, there's financial issues, and there's also personal feelings and issues that you have going along with it. And so investment bankers, what they're able to do is they are able to professionalize that process such that it makes it most attractive to the buyers. But effectively, they're also, as a seller, they're also your gladiator. They're going out there and negotiating some of the harder points. And the larger the companies, a lot of times the more, not necessarily the more complex, but certainly the more issues that you typically have along the way. And frankly, there's a fee that's attached to any investment banker, just like a real estate broker. There's still going to be a fee. So there will also be, when you get to a certain size, there's only going to be a certain number of people that could buy that company, and you want to be able to nail that down and then make sure that those fees are a good return on an investment for getting the process done.
Well, that's great. Thank you. So one thing I'd note, over my career, I've been on all sides of M&A transactions as a financier, which we do again now. I've been on the selling side, I've been on the buying side, I've been a board member. One of the things that I've learned, and I think this correlates to what you guys are talking about, is it's harder than you think. And even when you have prepared, you still won't be ready. And it's the emotional issues that trip you up. And Patrick, you mentioned that, but I'm going to ask Nick, these emotional issues, how big do those weigh in your experience with, in particular with sellers?
Very heavily. As Patrick was alluding to, this is your baby. You built this company. It may be generational. The key people you have working with you are tantamount to family. Other things that add to the emotional aspects are, one's age, possibly one's health. So you've got a lot of things going on in the background that is motivating one to be a seller. And then that gets weighed upon by all of the financial stress, the due diligence, the process of sussing through multiple offers, trying to figure out where the right fit is with a potential buyer, maintaining confidentiality during this whole process. It's very, very nerve-wracking, not to be underestimated.
Great, thank you. So we're talking largely about selling the company, but Patrick, Nick, what if I don't want to sell my company? You know what? I've got a kind of nice company. I'm making a nice living. Why should I listen to you guys? Why, or any of the three of us? Why should I do some of these things? And I have a perspective on it, but I'd like to hear yours first.
Sure. We'll start it this way, because anything that's going to make a company valuable upon a sale is going to make a company valuable in general. All right. And so even if your intention is not selling for many years or decades, I actually have one buyer of companies to which I'm selling that he set his company up for 150-year life, and all the profits are going into charities, to things that he loves. But even if you look at it, a company that is always ready to sell and is following what Nick and I are saying in terms of preparation and having it ready is still operating at an optimal level. It's operating at a better level than most. And so if you're operating it as if you're selling it, then you're not only reaping the rewards of it, but also in the event that something unforeseen comes in, it could be death or divorce or disease or any one of those major issues in life. It's not something that you're scrambling to do in order to prepare to sell. You already have it ready to go. And frankly, to be kind to your family, to be kind to your friends, to any of your behests, it's imperative for the CEO or for the founder of the company to be able to leave their estate in good shape. And that also includes a well-run company.
Yeah.
Well,
I agree with that. I think, estate planning weighs very heavily into the forefront of thinking about selling your business. My old adage is it's not what you get, it's what you keep. So some estate planning, some tax planning, some shares, some gifting, things you want to look at ahead of a sale, ahead of prepping for a sale. You're not going to have a big window to execute on a estate or a gifting plan if you don't start timely.
So Nick, you talked about that earlier. You talked about starting two to 3 years out, and I wanted to go down that road a little bit. I assume some of that is for these reasons that you just alluded to, the tax planning that you can do. Maybe there's other reasons that are behind that, but then the related question is, how long does it actually take to sell my company? We can talk about the prep for 2 to 3 years, but can I sell it in 60 days? Should I sell it in 180 days? And I realize I asked a multi-part question there.
Yeah, I was going to say,
so
whether you want to take a crack first, and then I'll back clean up.
Yeah,
on that.
I'll let you talk about the timeline, but other, I guess, non-financial aspects of preparing for a sale. A lot of the things that get kind of caught up in due diligence would be, are your key people under tight employment contracts? Are there non-competes, non-solicits in place? If not, you've got the opportunity of this window of time to, tighten up the housekeeping. Your major customers, Patrick alluded to, concentrations being an issue. Your major customer contracts, do they have assignability clauses? This always comes into play in M&A work. And if not, usually buyer and seller are scrambling for a way to do a deal to avoid having to get the consent of your largest client to approve the sale. So again, working with your key professionals to make sure you've got your personnel under contract, to make sure your key customer contracts are as transferable as one can make them be. These are all things you can start to do ahead of time, which is, improving the business, even if you're not selling it.
Right. Well, and one thing and I appreciate everything here as a CEO. Now I'm not the founder. I'm a paid professional, but when I've taken on new roles, I've always started with the aspect of I'm going to build a team that doesn't need me. In other words, I'm going to prepare for that day that I'm not going to be in the business. And I think about it as a strategic imperative because there's a lot of reasons why, I or any of my team may not be in the business. And I think, Patrick, that ties into what you and Nick are really talking about here. And I know that, and I want to go into some of the key aspects. So David, if maybe you go to the first page of those. Sure. I know when these things are being taken care of, books and records, we talked about this, accurate and informative. I'd like to hear from both of you about KPIs and benchmarking. But I know as CEO, when these things are in good shape, then I can rest easy at night because I know how the business is doing. But you bet. Patrick, can you talk to how it affects a sale, particularly that last part?
Yeah, I will. And if you don't mind me kind of picking up the spare on the timing, typically a company to sell usually takes about 6 months. Once you start pulling the triggers, and it's usually 2 months of prep, 2 months of marketing, and then typically 2 months of close. And that can extend sometimes, or sometimes it can be compressed depending on how well organized the founder or the owner is when it comes to that. And it sometimes can be extended depending on the difficulty or some of the issues that we run into. But specifically going over to the books and records and the accuracy and the information, we are currently in the middle of a deal where there were some things uncovered in what's called a quality of earnings, a Q of E. And whenever you have a company that's of size, you're going to have a buyer who comes in and they check the veracity of everything that the seller has told them, everything that the seller's representative team have told them. And they usually hire an outside accounting firm to do this Q of E. Nick's been on thousands of them. And the upshot of it is that the more accurate, informative, and the KPIs and benchmarks that go along that are the company is currently operating under, the quicker that you have access to them and the more accurate they are, the quicker and better it is to be able to get through the quality of earnings. If you have things that are in disarray or not accounted for or not necessarily GAAP or not accrual-based accounting, then it doesn't make the deal impossible to sell. But what it does is it adds a level of complexity, difficulty, and time to it. So these are things that an owner can control ahead of the process and probably should get their arms around first. Nick?
Yeah, interesting that the investment banker is talking about books and records, but okay. I think part of operating your own company efficiently is keeping track of your own KPIs, doing your own benchmarking, because trust me, when you get in front of a series of purchasers, they're going to be looking at your stats as compared to those same industry benchmarks to see how you measure up. And that is going to be, a key focal point for them in terms of one of the aspects that can impact your valuation. So you want to keep your KPIs, you want to keep your benchmarking stats tight or better than industry standards as best you can.
Well, or Nick, because I always think about benchmarking and KPIs, it sometimes is just a starting point of the conversation. In other words, if you're different than maybe what you see in some of the industry stats, understand why that is and be able to explain it. because people
Yeah.
will they'll
Different
respond
doesn't
to
always
that.
mean bad. That's correct.
Exactly right. So
It's interesting on that, Terry. It's interesting because we actually have buyers who will be looking at narrower gross margin type companies because they know that either their technology play or some of the way that they operate it allows them a distinct competitive advantage in the bidding process for that particular company. So being able to at least have KPIs and to be able to have those benchmarks against the industry gives you not just operating room, but certainly it allows a buyer to understand more thoroughly where you lie and to attract the right kind of buyer.
Okay, David, if you could go to the next slide, we're going to stay on the financial aspect and talk about forecasting for a minute. And Nick, let's start over with you. Patrick was talking about having a plan for the next 2 years. Could you maybe pull on that a little bit and talk about what people should be doing and thinking about with their forecasting?
Yeah, a plan is a nice thing to have. Although, unless you've got a real crack accounting department or you're an operator with a good financially strong background, I look at plenty of projections all day long, and I can tell you 98% of them don't come to fruition. So just having a 2-year plan or having a 2-year projection isn't really what the point of this is. You want the ability to have accurate numbers and to forecast reasonably ahead. That doesn't necessarily mean years. A single year is sufficient enough. This is a business that evolves week to week, pay cycle to pay cycle. And the longer you go out, the less accurate those predictions get, especially where we're in an economy that's in turmoil. But do the best you can. Nothing's perfect, but the information that you do put out there needs to be accurate. It needs to be reliable, and you need to be able to support your assumptions. Those are the critical factors.
Well, and then as I think our third point here, also being able to use a forecast to anticipate, well, what happens when we are off plan? Because we're going to be above or below. That's just the way, life goes. And so what does that mean for the business at that point? David, I want to keep moving along so we have some time for some Q&A, and there's at least one question in the chat, but could we go to that last of our slides? So we touched on this briefly. Patrick, could you talk about, non-ownership management team and the importance of that to a buyer?
You bet. Presumably in most transactions, they're assuming that the owner, the seller, is going to be exiting at some point. So whether or not it's immediately upon the transaction or it's a year out, or at some point they're going to be going away. And so typically what they're going to be looking at is that next level of leadership. You actually touched on something, Terry, at the top of your remarks, which is the team that you're around you and is the company going to run well without you? One of the questions we actually ask a seller is, before we engage them, is, when was the last vacation you took? How long was it? Where'd you go? How often did you check in? And the right answer to that is, I went to Greece for 6 months or 6 weeks and I lost the office's phone number. The wrong answer is, I can't take a vacation. This place would fall apart without me. So looking at that succession planning and looking at the development of the team that's around you so the company can operate even without your presence adds significant value to the organization. But it also indicates to the buyer, when you look at the risk return profile, the more educated your team is, the more competent they are, and the more confident they are in running the business even without you, that lowers the risk to a buyer that something could go wrong post-transaction.
Yeah, and the lower the risk, typically the better the value of the company. So again, coming back to, I would call it the second tier of leadership, who's comes after the owner. Those key people you want, again, locked up under contract, perhaps consider making them minority shareholders. The more you can tie them into the company, the better off you're going to be in terms of a valuation issue and a commitment issue.